Welcome back, everyone, to the .NET MAUI podcast. I am one of your hosts, James Montemagno, and with me,
David Ortnow.
wow, we're in a very fancy room together.
We are indeed close quarters, but it's okay.
Yeah, not it is a comfy close quarter. Like
It is.
sometimes when you watch podcasts when they record in person, like they're so far away.
Mm.
But here at Microsoft, we like to get as close as humanly possible to record
We could
podcasts.
propose like some lazy boys,
Yeah,
and like because I feel like I don't watch a lot of podcasts, but
yeah.
It does seem to be like the couch, the super comfy is the way that those go.
Do you have a podcast that you're listening to now? Like what's on your podcast app? I use
I
Pocketcasts.
Yeah. I actually have a lot of shows on my podcast app that I
Mhm.
unfortunately don't listen to,
See,
but
only 3 rows.
yeah.
Yeah, I got Planet Money, cool. Love to See It, that's a bachelorette podcast. All the Hacks, great pod. I have a lot of NPR. Up First,
Mm,
NPR Politics, not exciting. Tech Meme Ride Home, great tech pod. Climate Deniers Playbook, and Money for Couples, which used to be I'll Teach You to Be Rich with Ramit Sethi. So some
right.
finance, some tech, some
Yeah.
bachelor. It's a little bit of everything. I don't know. Do you go through phases of podcasts?
I do. I'll listen to podcasts that are typically running fitness related
Mhm.
um, when I have listened to them, or I'll listen to things about language learning. So
Oh.
because I've been learning Korean forever.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. Yeah, how's that going? How's that journey going?
It's fine. It's I take it for what it is. Yeah, I have no real actual practical use for it.
Well, when you go to Seoul.
When I go to
Yeah.
Seoul, that one time in my life,
We're
sometime.
we're coming for you, Justin. And if you are in Korea, make sure you say hi to Justin for us, who's on our cloud advocate. He is
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yep.
So we're here in the studio and we're talking .NET MAUI, and we just put out you and the team, David, .NET MAUI in .NET 9, release candidate 2,
Yes.
.NET MAUI 9, release candidate 2. I don't know what we're calling it. It's like
Right.
.NET Aspire 2. But RC2, I've been working really close with the release team. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know if we talked about it before, but um, myself, John Galloway, Rich, like and then all the PMs and engineers, kind of this V team talking about the releases. It's
Mhm.
been real fun because, as many people know, I'm like not on the team, right? Like I've written a tiny bit of Xamarin code a long time ago. That's in the product. That's probably not
Tiny,
there anymore.
tiny bit.
I'm pretty sure someone ripped it out.
Well, you
But
talk to Matthew about that.
yeah, there. But I got to get more insight into what you and the team have been up to.
Mm.
And I feel like since the last time we talked, a lot of stuff in Preview 7, the RC1 and RC2 has come out. I think now is the perfect time between now and the .NET 9 release to talk to everyone about this, because like now is the time. There's a go live license. Go in, give it a try, see what's going on. So like, what is happening
Yeah.
in .NET MAUI? Because like if you read the release notes, which says it's focusing on product quality, I feel like yes, but also there's some cool stuff happening.
There's always features that get snuck in. I hate to say that, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things that come out of specific customer requests or strategic requests or expectations that we should deliver. So, yeah, so the new Android, new iOS is in. Xcode 16 is now supported all across the board.
Which
Um,
for people don't know, it's a little complicated because there's a lot of
yeah.
OS requirements for Xcode 16.
Mm.
I believe you need 14.5 or later.
Yes, or later.
But then also, like if it auto upgraded, it's always hard with Xcode. Like I'm
Mm.
always in a I'll tell you when I want to
Yeah.
upgrade Apple, which then I read the release notes
Yeah.
and then decide, okay, when I'm going to upgrade. But it's in the box. iOS 18,
Yeah, it's there.
it's all good.
Yeah, I told Maddie and I just got back. Gerald was there, Sweeky was there, doing
Squad.
Techorama in the
Nice.
Netherlands.
Great conference.
And then we also did a developer day in Cologne, Germany,
Oh,
at the
also,
Microsoft office.
yeah, that was like it used to be the Xamarin
Used to be a Zam Dev Day
Dev,
or Xamarin Day
you
or
know,
something like that. Yeah. So
great office too.
it's a great office. One of the two elevators wasn't working.
Oh, that's a
And
bummer.
actually, we learned that the floor below the floor that we almost always go to accommodates more people.
Oh,
So we actually blew past fire code on the other floor,
oh my goodness.
and so
Wow.
upgraded by downgrading one floor. But I told them when it comes to the Xcode and Apple things, I'm almost always the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
I like to go in first, but I always check with Rolf.
Yeah.
Like, "Rolf, can I do this? Is this ready?"
Yeah.
And then if Rolf says go for it, then I go for it, and then we tell people. So if you're not seeing me and or people on the team that are actively using and testing the early previews of things, more than likely it's not safe for you. And if it's certainly not in the release notes, then don't do it.
There's ba there's basically, like, 2 times a year, both for Google and Apple, that I like to check a few places. Here's my rundown. I like to check docs
Yeah.
because there's actually, like, a compatibility layer of, like, what should be in there. Uh, GitHub, because there's usually an issue. Like the engineering team, like almost always has a like I think for like ever for like 5 months, 6 months, it was like Xcode
Mhm.
16 support like
Yeah.
issue, like 1,000 people like commented on it, and then also the release notes. So those are the
Yeah.
three places, which is also in GitHub usually or on in Docs for example. But those are like the places I always look before upgrading anything new, kind of. And
Right.
Android's a little bit more it'll work as long as you have, like, the older SDK installed. It's not like
Mhm.
Xcode where it's, like, the whole thing, right? It's, like,
Yeah.
all or nothing almost.
Yeah. Google really hasn't changed a lot
No.
in each release for several years, it seems. Apple this year did impose some restrictions, some requirements. So it wasn't just the Xcode version, and it was also what, pardon me, what Xcode worked with Sequoia,
Yeah.
and then there are many things that Sequoia introduced that still don't work today. So that is getting fixed, but yeah, beware. And if you're auto updating things, whether it's your OS or your Xcode, and it's your primary business machine for doing development, turn that nonsense off.
Yeah.
You want to be super careful.
It's a hard one, right? Because I think when we think about security and you always want to be on the latest version, you want to have the security release. So what I've been doing is like, when you go into Mac OS, like here I'm on my Windows machine, but on my Mac MacBook Air that I have, it's a conscious decision, just like on your iPhone. It's like you make the conscious decision. Do you want to keep getting patches on this OS
Mm.
or do you want to actually upgrade to the new OS? And my Mac, on iOS, I'm all in. I'm give me all the things immediately. I'm good because I've been through so many of the beta programs. On Mac
Mhm.
OS, as a developer, right? I think consumer hat versus developer hat. Developer hat, I'm always like, let me just wait a little bit longer. Just want to hang on just a tiny bit longer. So I've been holding off on that button to press to move forward on. But I saw you were using some fancy features earlier with your iPhone. I was like, oh, I want that. But also, we should point out that this Xcode 16 support iOS 18 is not just .NET 9, but also .NET 8, correct?
Also .NET 8, yep. So if you're on Net 8 and you have not yet adopted the RCs, then you're good to go as
Yeah.
well. Of course, you can continue on what was it, Xcode 15.4
Yeah.
through April of next year. So there's no expectation that Apple will block your apps before then. But there are a couple of squirrely things that Apple did, in particular related to tab positions,
Mm.
which has surfaced more on the Mac Catalyst side, but we've also noticed it occasionally on iOS.
Oh, interesting.
You're used to your tabs being where at the bottom.
The bottom.
Remember when Google went from top tabs to bottom tabs?
Yeah. Oh, did Apple move stuff to the top?
Yeah.
No, no.
So so there
Interesting.
are some scenarios where suddenly these buttons appear up in the title view or the title bar, and you're like, "How
Oh.
did that what is that thing?
Oh,
What what is that?
interesting.
You see that? What is
Yeah.
it?" And yeah, we've come to find that that's what they've done, and yeah, so
Oh,
you can totally and then the great thing about Maui is because it is built on native and you have a very, um porous abstraction, you can poke right through and get to the native APIs to override those things without having us to release a new build or anything like that. You
yeah.
can totally do that. But we're certainly thinking through what are the right defaults for us to follow. Where is Apple heading with this? Because
Yeah.
they haven't been super explicit on some of these things. So there were a few things like that that caught us, but all in all, it was a fairly compatible release for like, your apps should look and run as they did before.
Yeah.
So that's good.
That's good. Yeah, and I'm always a big fan. Like one thing that I always like to do as a developer too, and we've talked about beta summers and things like that, is always like just testing the compatibility of my apps on their latest releases. So I'm a usually a beta tester of the
Yeah,
latest iOS releases, always checking my apps, make sure they're good. Even if I'm not going to put on an update, like it just
yeah,
is it running? Is it smooth as a butter? It's good there. And I would say on the iOS side, like I'm pretty good. On the Android side, it really is like it's not just the OS is moving, but it's a lot of the Android billing libraries, support libraries, things
mhm.
are moving. So, it's always good to stay up to date, but also sometimes it's okay to just chill out for a second. You know what I mean? Like, we got enough moving parts. So that's the James mentality. Let's chill. Let's go on a little, not update everything all at once. It's just good
Yeah.
as long as there's not security issues in there. But there's a lot more in RC2, I guess, RC1, RC2
Yeah, I mean,
proposed.
RC1 and RC2 are full of bug fixes.
Yeah.
So, and many of these also are ported to Net 8, but RC1 and RC2 were very much feature releases. I think it was Preview 7 where kind of all the features
Yeah. 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 I
land.
noticed that as a big chunky one, which is
Yeah,
good.
because it was
Yeah.
the last one before RC, right?
Yeah.
So like, everything's got to get in.
So
Um,
that's good to point out, right? When you
yeah,
go into RC mode, it really is feature lockdown,
mm,
getting feedback from all of you, right? Which is why, since we're here, I wanted to record this podcast. Is like, hey, we really want like that feedback to like get into the RC like testing, right? Like now's the time. Like,
yeah.
November 12th is around the corner. Obviously, you do service releases all the time, but with the new features that were in Preview 7, like now's the time to smooth out any
Yeah.
things with those, right?
Yeah, and previews in general get much less traffic than public GA
Yeah.
releases, and that makes sense. But we certainly promote the ease of which you can try
Mm.
the previews
Yeah.
without needing to go all in on it. You just branch, upgrade your bits, so the upgrade path, we'll have a full upgrade guide with all the potential things you might need to change in your project when you go from Net 8 to Net 9, and we'll also have the upgrade assistant there to help you as well. Which many people think upgrade assistant, oh, that's going from framework to .NET or going from Xamarin to .NET
Maui.
MAUI, but it's there also to help you go from 8 to 9.
Yeah.
And so we've been keeping track of the changes that it's best suited to do. So it's as simple as change Net 8 to Net 9 in your CS project, and you do want to upgrade a couple of the minimum versions. So
Mm.
iOS minimum version now is 12.2. Mac Catalyst is 15.0, not 15. If you miss the dot
0.
zero, it'll complain.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
Um, and then there are some updates coming for the Windows version.
Hmm.
And Android, you have a new version, but I think you're pretty safe to keep the minimum version the way it
Yeah.
is. But check the docs at the time of GA release.
Yeah, and there's always like good analytics too, as far as like OS usage too.
Yeah,
Like if you just because it supports and goes all the way back, doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, right?
yeah.
As well, look at your usage, look at your what the stores are telling you. Because I definitely noticed when iOS 18 came out, I think Frank and I call it like N minus two,
Mhm.
basically, which is like okay, iOS 18 is out, which means I can drop support for anything N, which would be 18
Yeah,
minus 2. So anything past iOS 16. So we would drop support for iOS like 15 in like
right.
our apps. Like that's what Frank independent
Yeah.
there. But I noticed in the App Store, there was a lot of apps that I got that were like, hey, no longer. In fact, I even got a new teleprompter app that I've just been playing around with. And, it's in the App Store on my iPad. And I have an older iPad that doesn't get the new ones. It's like locked on
Mm.
iOS 17.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, like, you're on an older device, like it doesn't support it. Maybe it's iOS 15, I don't know. But still let you download an old version, which is fascinating too. It's like it's always sometimes good to have an old device sitting around just for
Yeah.
fun on it.
Yeah.
But just to say, you don't need to necessarily support it, even though Maui supports it as well. So good to know.
Well, and there are benefits to not supporting the older bits as
Mm,
well. So, for example, in I think it was Preview 7, maybe it was earlier. Yeah, it was in Preview 7. We shipped a new collection view, carousel view handler. So the backing version for iOS and Mac Catalyst. And so, why did we do this? Well, we certainly heard plenty of feedback that the performance and the fidelity of collection view in particular on iOS was not near where it needed to be,
mm,
and certainly not as good as on Android. And partially the reason was is that we were using a rather old implementation of collection view
oh,
on iOS.
gotcha. Wow.
And since that time, Apple has come out with a new control, which I should probably learn the actual name.
It's not UI collection view? I don't even know what it is. I don't even know what it is.
But there is a
Yeah.
new implementation, but it has a newer, you can't go as far back
Oh,
compatibility-wise.
gotcha, yeah.
And so if you are targeting way back, you're not going to reap the benefits of the newer modern control from Apple,
Oh,
which is better for performance, layout fidelity, and certain things like that.
yeah.
So, think very carefully about, do I really need to go back that far? Especially if you're dealing with issues that the newer controls may actually solve for you. And as far as how we handle that, we've got the ability in our code to, of course, say if you're on iOS this version or greater, use this handler, otherwise use another handler.
Got it.
But in Preview 7, this collection view, carousel view handler is something you actually opt into, and it will go GA that way. You'll opt into it in your Maui program. So it's a simple snippet. Register the handler to override the existing handler for iOS and Catalyst,
Yeah.
and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. But Bob's not my uncle, but actually, you know what? Funnily enough, I do have an Uncle Bob.
You do have an Uncle
Bob and
Bob.
Barry.
Nice.
Shout out. So, and we talked about these features in the last podcast with
Mhm.
Matthew. There, and we talked about the title bar. We talked about the new hybrid view. What kind of feedback have you been hearing from developers using it, and what things have like maybe been improved that maybe folks would want to go check out in these RCs?
So those ones in particular, I think are fairly good and stable. Carousel view, certainly the feedback has been it's not there yet, which is
Mm,
part of why it's still opt-in,
okay.
for that particular
Is
feature.
collection view going to no longer opt in? Does it happen or no? Is for
No, in
GA?
GA, they're both opt-in because
Oh,
they actually have a shared ancestry.
oh, okay.
So you can't really separate them at this point.
I see.
They need to go together.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay.
But one of the things that we did fix and then needed to fix again were some image layout related issues. So, in particular, this is another iOS funness where if you have an icon and a label and you want to control the positioning and layout of it, that is actually not something that the iOS button, UI button, directly supports.
Uh,
And so it's a bunch of manipulation on top of the native control to deliver that experience. So TJ on the Maui team has been working heavily for weeks and weeks to go through all the iterations of what that button needs to do, and improving it, and also I think maybe using a new
yeah.
technique. But anyway, so that was of course based on feedback from people that had been using it, saying, hey, yeah, you got better here, but this is still wrong, or this is a regression, you need to go fix this sort of thing. And that's the stuff that uh, we really need to hear about, is what are the regressions and where can we improve.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Um, I want to get deeper on these features. And specifically, I want to go a little bit deeper on a template change, because one of the cool advantages of trying out, even if you're just giving some feedback, is just exploring the file new templates and like trying to build something simple and like giving feedback to the product team. And I did this recently, and I know Gerald gave me a heads up on it because he launched the new Blazor hybrid workshop. I'll put a link in the show
Mhm.
notes, and he also has a 4-hour video on it.
Who
Seems
did he get that
familiar.
idea from, I
I don't
wonder?
know. I don't know. But him and Sweeky, like and others, put together this hybrid workshop, and it was cool because we were talking about what would be good, what would be bad about like doing XYZ and what to show off. It's a great workshop, so definitely check it out if you're just interested in Blazor hybrid. But I remember he was telling me, he's like, "Hey, we're making this change in .NET 9." And I was like, "Oh," I was like, "Well, if Gerald's telling me there's a change coming, I'm already a little nervous." He's like, "It may alter the course of history of all time." And I was like, "Oh my gosh," And I think we mentioned it last podcast, but it is the obsolescence of main page. And when you go to file new, main page is no longer there. Everything is window based.
Mm,
Which seems like a small change. Okay, before I used to say main page equals
mm,
um, this page, but now it is in the app, you're creating a window that has a page in it.
yeah.
What does that mean for developers? What's the feedback? What
Mm,
should people looking to go from 8 to 9 know to change implications? Because obviously the new title bar, and if you're on Windows, it's on the window,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
and you can put it anywhere technically. I was just like shoving it
Yeah, it's just a
anywhere.
content view.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. But I want to talk about main page. It's obsolete. What do I got to know? Do I got to rewrite everything? What's the situation? What's the
The
feedback?
world has come to a standstill all because of main page. So, no, you don't have to rewrite anything. As a matter of fact, it's been obsoleted, but it's still there.
Okay.
However, I did learn as I was working on the eShop app, when you have treat warnings as errors turned on,
Uh,
you're going to need to go change that main page or go ignore that
yeah.
particular warning. Um, so it's all still in the app XAML CS or the app CS. And so you're just going to override the window creation
Hmm.
and then pass in the thing that you were setting to main page to the constructor of the window that you create.
Okay.
Um, the thing is that that has actually already been happening for you in .NET MAUI behind the scenes.
Oh, okay.
So
So,
all we've really done is be more transparent about the fact that, hey, guess what? We've been creating a window for you this whole time.
oh, okay. Gotcha.
And now that we've showed you that we've been doing this for you, now it's your responsibility to do this. So this, has the benefit, of course, with title view being one of the things to reveal that this is where that work needs to happen
I
in
see.
your application if you're going to attach a title bar to a window. Also, this is where you're going to do additional work if you're doing multiple windows. And we have
Yeah.
customers that use multiple windows, specifically on desktop. However, it's also a feature that can work on Android
Hmm.
and I think on the iPad OS.
Yeah. Big enough ones.
So,
Yeah.
are a lot of people doing it there? I'm not sure, but I certainly know they are on desktop.
Yeah.
So those are the motivations behind it. It's a real simple, straightforward change.
Yeah.
Take it 30 seconds or less.
I think something, to dive a little bit deeper on that, what you just said is something to think about too is what do you want your app experience to be where your app shows up? And you made a good point on Android, but specifically, I recently bought a low end Chromebook on Woot for my father in law. It was like
Okay.
$40 and it runs Android apps
Okay.
and multi window Android
Trying
apps.
to figure out if you like your father-in-law or not at this point.
Well, he primarily does everything on his iPhone. And we're like, well, do you get him an iPad? Do you get him a Mac? Like, what are some things? And I was like, what's one thing that just boots up,
Just works.
just
Okay.
works.
Sure.
It's
Gotcha.
good,
Yeah, yeah. That's why
which
they give them to all the kids at school.
exactly. So like it just works. I mean, my Windows machine just works and your Mac just works, but
Mm,
there's
less to go wrong.
there's less to go wrong. Anyways, we did try to give it to him and he's like, no. So, I was like, okay. He's like, no, it's okay. I'm good. I'm good with my iPhone. And I was like, okay, respect, respect.
Okay.
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 We tried. I think there's just a few Word docs that he wanted to open mostly, and
Gotcha.
it's easier to open Word docs on a machine.
True.
There's Word Android apps too, obviously. So it's just kind of cool. Like, you know what
True.
I mean? So it was like I just had Word on the Chromebook and also it was really neat. Anyways, regardless, but it's like, yeah, you could be developing a Windows and a Mac application with multiple windows, but also, what about if you're building some sort of application that maybe people are going to open up on Chromebooks,
Yeah.
right? Like that is another desktop platform, it just happens to be Android.
Mhm.
Something to think about in this, which I don't really think about that often because I'm always either building just a desktop app or just a mobile app. Like,
Yeah.
my desktop apps, like my Stream Timer, are only on Mac and Windows, and then my mobile apps are only on mobile.
Mhm.
Like, and I haven't bridged that gap for it. I've tinkered around with it, but then I haven't added that extra layer, which is like, if I do extra work, the experience would be so much better, right? I have a skiing app, and like actually, multiple windows would be so cool to actually have going on there. But now
Mm.
the window's kind of more in my face. I think I have to pay attention to it. Before
It
I could just ignore it.
it is, and now you know where to. If you want to replace the page, that's where you replace it. Which is something that I cautioned against for so long in Xamarin
Mm,
Forums, because I was told, well, we don't really recommend it. It's not very well tested, and
yeah.
certainly I saw a lot of people getting in trouble with it. In particular, if you're doing a login page and then you want to add your tabbed page or flyout page or whatever, or your shell to it after
Hmm.
the login page, and you're swapping it out. There was just in particular in Xamarin Forums a lot of app wiring things
Yeah.
that were associated to the main page. Well, now in .NET MAUI, a lot of that is associated to the window.
Yeah.
That's now the root. visual element that gets put on the screen
Yeah.
in your application. And the page itself is just the view that you're going to render within that context. So if you need to swap out that page on the window, you're more able to do it
Yeah,
with less fear.
so
That's a
you
lot of
putting
words.
are you putting the so you put the pages in an app shell and an app shell in a window? Is that what happens? What does happen, David?
Yeah, essentially.
Do you swap out your app shells then?
You could swap out the app shell, absolutely.
Oh,
So
interesting.
if you wanted to give preference, or well, let's say for example, and we've certainly heard this from customers in the past, hey, I've got, different login roles for my application.
Oh, yeah.
And that is going to determine the different menu items that should be available to them.
Yeah.
So we did a bunch of work in Xamarin Forms to enable is enabled and is visible and things like that, and help you to do dynamic rendering of shell
Mm,
items. But you could also just as easily now have one shell that is for the admin, one shell that is for the
user.
regular user,
Yeah.
and swap them out that way
That's kinda
on the
cool.
page.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's cleaner,
Yeah.
certainly more straightforward as to you're doing what you intend to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm an app
Um,
shell believer, a lot of people blame me that, the app shell is the default, and I'll take that blame. I might have been a little too vocal in my days, but I'm a believer in the shell of the app.
it's a great way to go.
I think that's fascinating though, because through the years that I've been building apps and you've been building apps and we've been
Mhm.
talking to developers, is like I feel like that login scenario is the thing when
Mm.
we talk to so many enterprise developers, is like that. Oh, I gotta get a login. Like that was such a hard scenario. It sounds like that is really simplified. There's always a way to do it, but a lot of times people don't want to pop up the login on top of a thing, although most of my apps do that anyways, that I use in general. So sometimes you try to fight the system so hard, but now it
Yeah.
seems like there's a scenario here on it. Well, I'm glad it's been going good. And what I've been doing is I've been comparing what I like to do. This is my scenario. What I tell people today to do, if you're interested in giving these RCs a try, going into GA, getting your apps ready, I literally on I have one big monitor, but if you have two monitors or if you have one monitor, pull up your app, do file new on a new project, and then just open up the CS proj, go file to file within the templates. I
Mhm.
just like to see what changed.
Yeah.
And that's what I've mostly noticed is some things in the CS proj, and then the main page is gone. And I also noticed that the styles have been updated a little bit, at least with the title bar control is
Mm.
in there. Is there anything else? Any other like main template changes? Like if I'm upgrading, like you said, there's some stuff, but anything else in the template that I should know about that like would change with the new defaults in 9?
Don't think so.
No. Because if you're going to use the new title
But
bar,
you've been comparing, so if
I have
you
been. I think that's mostly it that I've seen.
yeah, we
Yeah.
really haven't, that hasn't been a key need or priority for us to update them. There have been some fixes along the way to the default styles that we put in there.
Yeah.
But by and large, we haven't heard a ton of feedback about needs to
Yeah.
make other changes. So, making the controls and the layouts all do the things that they're meant to do certainly takes a higher
Yeah.
priority.
I also want to point out something. I was talking to Etienne here, who was doing a presentation on like cross-platform development, and we were going through and we were kind of having this debate over like native versus cross-platform native versus native controls versus native UI versus like all the native-y things. And one thing I think when you file new that's different in .NET MAUI, so if you're just now entering the .NET MAUI world, is the theme is present and applied
Mm,
by default, which means that light, dark theme,
mm,
fonts, buttons all look the same, which means necessarily they don't look 100% to the platform. Like the
mhm.
button no longer looks like an Android Fluent button. It
Yeah,
looks like they all look the same. Same with the UI button. Technically, the UI buttons don't have backgrounds, but you apply one. That's a button. If you don't want those and you want it to look 100 bare bones, you just delete the 2 lines of code out of like the resource. You say, don't include these styles,
right.
and then you're good to go. So it's a kind of a pro tip because that is what they went with. And I was telling them, I said, I remember David and Maddie talking about all this research about like what people wanted.
Mm.
And I still felt like it was 50-50. I don't know if there's any as far as like native looking controls versus I want my app to look the same. Is there any research on that? What are your thoughts on
We
developers?
haven't renewed the research
Yeah.
on it in quite a while. The feedback, I'll just speak about the last several weeks of meeting a lot of developers and what they actually want to and need to see. I feel like the predominant opinion is, um, I want my app to be brand consistent.
Mm,
So colors look the way they do across both. Buttons generally look the way that they should, even if they were to behave slightly platform specific, like the ripple on Android versus
yeah.
no ripple on iOS. Um, but to retain the unique characteristics of each platform when it comes to navigation, when it comes to, I think text input's a bit more fluid
Mm,
because I don't know anybody that wants to keep the native iOS text input
yeah.
look and feel. You almost always want it to be more modern.
Yeah.
It's really old. Like they
Yeah.
haven't refreshed UI kit stuff in forever, and I don't know that Swift UI is any better in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so.
Um, so generally, when you kind of tease apart, well, what do you mean by platform specific or consistent across platforms? Like, what do you really mean? What are the things that you want to be the same and need to be the same? That's kind of how I think I best describe it right now. At a higher level, I'm sure that there's details uh, that somebody else would argue about, but actually, at one of my presentations at Techorama, I had a screen that showed, here is the naked Android iOS,
Yeah.
and I had, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the more unique controls to each platform, checkbox, for example,
Yeah.
and an entry field, etcetera. And then I went, from the bare, to, with our app styles, and you could see the progression.
Yeah.
And then I went and used third-party component vendors that were based on graphic UI.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I said, okay, now here's the exact same thing, but with those. And they were like identical,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, so here are your options.
Yeah.
And you decide based on what your needs are, which route you go.
Yeah.
The segment in my session was basically know your options.
Yeah. Know your options, what you can do. And that's kind of the cool part of the flexibility of it. All right, David, what do people need to know if they've listened to 33 minutes of this podcast? What's the main takeaway? Where do they go? How do they get stuff? Where do they provide
Yeah.
feedback? What do they got to do? What do they need to know about .NET 9 besides that?
So RC2 is out. It's also in Visual Studio, so you can adopt that in the latest preview of Visual Studio on Windows.
Mm,
If you're on Mac or Linux, you can use the .NET workload command and install the workload set by version number. So definitely recommend you get on board with it sooner rather than later. GA is coming soon,
yeah.
and I think it's in a really good place. I use it daily because at this point, I'm pretty much writing code every day and building out more and more complex apps and talking to customers about it as well. So it is coming. Your support contract or support life cycle, sorry, for .NET MAUI is 18 months.
Yeah.
So from the time that we released .NET 8, you had 18 months. So you only have 6 months after .NET 9 is released to get off of .NET 8.
Yeah.
That doesn't go for your non-MAUI libraries and projects. You have the .NET policy for those, but be aware of that and plan accordingly.
Yeah.
I certainly know that some of our customers are better planners, and others are more uh, liberal with their planning. And so don't get yourself into a hard spot. You want to be upgrading,
Yeah.
if only to make sure that your stuff still consistently works on the devices that are out there,
Yeah.
because certainly your users are upgrading their mobile devices rapidly. And people are constantly updating their desktops.
And at some point, additionally, Apple and Google start to require, that's what
Yeah.
we talked about at the very beginning with Xcode 16 and the other stuff. It's like they're going to require this stuff. And yeah, it will work on .NET 8, but at some point, you got to move forward, and in the Xamarin days, at least, for when we were, it wasn't, you, you didn't really necessarily set anything in your CS proj when you were
Mm,
upgrading Xamarin and Xamarin Forms project. Like, yes, there was a NuGet for Xamarin Forms, just like there's NuGets now, but really, like, comparatively, it was just you were always just updating, and that just
Yeah.
whatever version of Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android there was just happened to be it. So
Mm.
yeah, you're changing, and now you're running on .NET 9. But in my mindset, I just in the mobile realm, I'm always just kind of thinking how I always thought, which is I'm always kind of on the latest version, always getting
Yeah.
things because I need to move. Because if I was a Swift or Kotlin developer building iOS or Android applications, that is the mentality that you get
Yes.
into, right? But obviously there's more timelines and things like that with .NET and the release cycle. So thanks for kind of getting that over with. So all right, that's going to do it for this month's weeks. I don't know. We'll be back with .NET 9 in the when the release comes out. Make sure you sign up for .NET Conf, the biggest .NET developer conference of the year, all virtual, all free. David will be there.
Yes, do not miss it. We've got some wonderful announcements, some customer showcases.
Yeah,
You do not want to miss it.
I'll be there. Watch out. It's going to be great. I'm very excited. My whole team's going to be there. Everyone's going to be there. Maddie's going to be there.
Everyone.
Damien's going to be there. Maria's going to be there.
Maybe we'll drag some of the Maui team into the studio because they're going to be visiting.
Gerald will be there. Everyone's going to be there. Are you going to be there? .netconf.net. Check it out. All right, that's going to do it for this .NET MAUI podcast. Subscribe, like, do all the things. Thanks, everyone. Boop.